Round of applause to Nick Desbarats.
Thank you. Thanks, Vitaly. But next conference, nicer venue. Okay, come on.
We will try our best.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, this has got to be one of the nicest places that I've ever spoken in. Quite amazing. So my talk is actually going to be kind of a bonus talk. It's two talks in one. Right? So the first part, I'm going to talk about the kind of surprisingly wide variety of skills that people actually need in order to create what I consider to be effective charts or good charts. And then I'm going to give you a little mini crash course, a tiny little workshop about showing data over time. And we always think, oh, just line charts, right? We'll actually see that there are other possibilities here. Let's start with the surprisingly wide variety of skills that are required to create effective charts. Now, if we're going to talk about this, we first have to kind of define what an effective chart actually is. And this is it's actually a bit of a controversial topic. If you ask most people, they'll say something like, well, an effective chart shows the data well, or it just shows the data. But when you think about it, just showing data has no inherent value, right? We're always showing data for a reason. We're trying to explain something to somebody. We're trying to persuade them to do something. We're trying to make them aware of a problem or an opportunity. And by the way, even really shitty charts show data, right? And so it's not a very high bar to just say, okay, we want charts that show data. And so instead, I have kind of a different definition, which is that effective charts basically do the job that it was created to do, right? We always have a reason for creating charts. Like I said, we're trying to explain something, we're trying to persuade people to do something. And so that's it's a bit of an unusual way of thinking about it. It's almost like charts are like products. That's kind of how I think of them. But what exactly do I mean? What is the job of a chart? Well, it kind of depends, right? Depending on the situation, the job could be to persuade the audience to take a certain action, to explain a specific concept to them, to make the audience aware of a certain problem or opportunity, to answer a question that we've been asked, and we're using a chart to provide the answer, to allow the audience to filter or look up values, and on and on and on. In fact, there's a virtually unlimited number of reasons why we might create charts. And so basically, the job of the chart is different from one chart to the next. It's kind of like, what is the purpose of a document? It's like, well, documents can be for all sorts of things, right? Same with charts. So just saying like the chart is for showing data is not very useful, right? It's like saying a document is for showing words. It's like, wow, it's not very helpful. And so that's what ultimately matters. Like when somebody asks me, is this a good chart or bad chart? The very first question I ask is like, what is this chart for, essentially? What is its job? And this is different than what a lot of people, especially people in the data visualization field, will say. They'll focus on things like how precisely people can estimate the values, how quickly they can read it. And yeah, those things matter. But what ultimately matters is, did the chart do the job that we created it to do? So now that we've kind of established at least my definition of what is a good chart or an effective chart, let's kind of ask, well, what are the skills that are required to create charts that do their job, to create good charts? And most people will answer essentially something to do with software when we ask them this, right? We learn Excel or Tableau or Click or as many different software products. But I think that the list is much longer, right? You can see data visualization software expertise is kind of in the middle, but there's all sorts of other skills that I think are required to create any kind of chart. And then there are a whole bunch of other skills that are required to create some types of charts, right? Depending on the kind of chart you're creating, you might need the skills on the right, but you're always going to need the skills on the left here. And so I want to kind of quickly go through each one of these. So starting with kind of data handling expertise. And so this is things like knowing how to source data, check it, cleanse it, join, filter, like kind of massage it, process it before it's being shown in a chart. And I think this is a really good skill to have if you're creating charts. It's not absolutely essential, but if you have this skill, right, well, then basically things are going to go faster, right? Because if you're relying on somebody else to sort of pre-process and handle the data, well, things are going to go more slowly because now, there has to be a first stage or the person who handles the data, and then they pass it off to the person who creates the chart, so it just takes longer. And you're also going to have a kind of a a much less complete understanding of the data and where it came from, how it was collected, how it was maybe filtered or processed. And so if there are any issues or limitations in the data, which there usually are, then you might not become aware of them if you weren't the person who handled the data in the first place, right? Which means that if there are those issues and limitations in the data, then you're much less likely to include them in the chart. And so that's kind of an issue. We also have basic statistical knowledge. So you don't have to be a statistician, but you should know enough to avoid what I call statistical landmines. And so these are kind of common statistical mistakes that people make when they're handling numbers. Here's just kind of a sampling. There are many others, things like mistaking correlation for causation, showing medians when showing means when medians would be perhaps a better choice. And so if we're not aware of these common statistical mistakes, and like I said, there are others, then we're going to basically plant those landmines in our charts without knowing about it. That can be a real problem. If this is something that you think you need to maybe sort of brush up on, there are two excellent books that I can recommend. They're really easy reads. They're both less than 150 pages. There's Naked Statistics by Charles Whelan and The Data Loom by my friend and colleague, Stephen Pugh. And then we have what often comes to mind when people think about, oh, what do I need to know in order to create effective charts? People often think, well, I have to know how to use one of these products, right? Excel or Tableau or Power BI, there are many of them out there. But saying that knowing how to use a piece of data visualization software means that you can create effective charts, it's kind of like saying, well, being an expert user of Microsoft Word makes you a great writer. It's like, no, or being like an expert user of PowerPoint makes you a great presenter. It's like, no, right? I mean, yes, you have to know how to use a tool, but as we're starting to see, that's only one of many skills that are required. So it's necessary, but it's not sufficient. And then we have what I call situational knowledge. So to explain what this is, I want to tell a little story. So here, let's say we work for a small retail chain. We have 4 stores, and we've been looking at sales data. And oh my goodness, we found something obviously important, right? Look what's the story here? Store B, yeah, clearly we have some kind of major problem here. And so you're quite pleased with yourself. You found this important piece of information, and you bring it to the management meeting, and then you present your findings here. And instead of kind of like, at least appreciation for like, oh my goodness, thank goodness you found this, oohs and ahs, instead you get shrugs, crickets. They're like, no reaction. And then finally somebody kind of pops up and says, well, yeah, like we're shutting down store B, right? We're not replenishing its inventory, and so obviously its sales are going down. We all knew that this was going to happen, so thanks for wasting our time, basically. But then, so you thought, well, this was the story. But then, like I said, they weren't that interested because they already knew. But then somebody else pops up and says, hold on a second. We're also shutting down store C, but its sales have not been declining. In fact, they've actually gone up a little bit recently. That's weird. That's interesting. Maybe we should not be shutting down store C. And so even though it looked like the really important thing in this data, the story of the data, was store B, it actually wasn't. It was this. It was that boring-looking flat line. That was actually the really interesting thing. And you can stare at the data all day long, and you will never figure that out. You have to know what's happening around the data. You have to know what people are concerned about, what they expect or don't. And so that's what I mean by situational knowledge, is not just knowing the data and what's happening inside of the data, but also what would the audience expect to see versus what they would find surprising, any specific concerns, priorities, goals that they have at the moment, what kinds of insights they would find to be useful or useless, what background knowledge the audience already has, what are they lacking, what's their level of graphicacy, which is a word, right? We have literacy, numeracy, and graphicacy, which is the ability to read graphs. As you probably know, that varies widely for different people. Sometimes people are very sophisticated, other times they're not. We have to be aware of that. If there are ways that the audience is used to seeing certain data presented in a certain way, again, we should be aware of that. And again, we're not going to find out any of this in the data. We have to go to meetings, we have to get CC'd on emails, we have to plug ourselves into the organization. And very often I teach kind of like data people in workshops, and they don't like that, and they want to live in the data, they want to live in their spreadsheets, but I have to sort of tell them, you can't do that. You got to get out into the environment, right? You have to know where the data came from and how it's being used. And then we have what I call data viz, or data visualization fundamentals. And so that's things like knowing how to choose chart types, format scales, and there are different types of scales in charts, how to choose color palettes, not necessarily color palettes that look nice, but color palettes that make sense, which isn't the same thing. Avoiding accidentally misrepresenting the data, which is surprisingly easy to do. Even if you're not trying to lie, you're not trying to deceive anyone, it's really easy to do this. And many other skills. In fact, this is basically what I teach in my main course, which is called Practical Charts. It's 2 days long. And just to give you an idea of how much there is to know about data viz fundamentals, the smallest I could cram it into was literally 2 full days, 14-hour course. And we talk about things like how to choose chart types and how to choose colors that make sense, how to format quantitative scales. So really, I'm just kind of giving you an idea of like, there's a lot to learn. It's almost like learning a new language, basically. And then we have, so those are kind of the skills that I think are required to create any kind of chart. And then we have skills that are required to create certain types of charts, which are those that are listed on the right, like storytelling, for example. And this is a big buzz term now, certainly in kind of my field, data analytics, business intelligence. Data storytelling is like all the rage, to the point where many people assume that this is a must-have skill when you're creating charts. You have to know storytelling. In fact, sometimes people assume that it's the only skill that you need in order to create effective charts. But as we're seeing, you see my long list there are lots of other skills that we need as well. And so, I really think that storytelling is not, you don't need it for every chart. In fact, you don't need it most of the time. You only need storytelling when you're trying to persuade the audience to do something, or perhaps trying to explain a kind of a complicated concept or idea to them. And so not all charts need to tell a story. In fact, actually, it's only a relatively small minority of charts that need to tell a story. Right? If just somebody's asked you a question and you created a chart with the answer, you don't have to tell a story around that, right? It's okay. Graph design. So sometimes people will think, once again, some people believe that this is kind of the only skill that you need to create effective charts, that in effect kind of a pretty chart is a good chart, right? It's all about kind of aesthetics. However, when you have really talented graphic designers who know nothing about data visualization fundamentals, you often get charts that look fantastic, but when you actually start trying to use them or read them, they turn into what I call virally bad charts because they look so great, and yet anybody who knows anything about data visualization is like, oh, no, like this is deeply problematic, right? And so it's obviously not the only skill we need, it's just one of many that we're going through here. And so it's mostly required for things like infographics, data art, but not for what I call everyday charts, for kind of business reporting and presentations and that kind of thing. And so you definitely don't need to be a graphic artist to create effective charts, which is good news for people like me because I'm not that guy, right? I have no visual arts training. I'm not an artist by any stretch of the imagination. But that doesn't prevent me from creating effective business charts. You just don't want me creating infographics or data art. And then we have coding, advanced data visualization software expertise. But this is only needed really if you are creating very sophisticated or very customized, very bespoke kinds of charts, maybe highly technical or scientific charts. So it's not really needed for most charts. And then advanced statistical knowledge, which again, only really needed if you're creating very statistically sophisticated charts where you're showing sample data or confidence intervals, but most charts don't show those, so you don't need to know this for all charts. So that's kind of part one of our two-part bonus talk here. Some key takeaways. So really, one of the important points that I try and drive home with people is that the goal when creating charts isn't to show the data, right? That's of no value, it's kind of meaningless. Instead, we want to create charts that do their job. And it's a very different way of thinking about it. Surprisingly, wide variety of skills are required to create effective charts. It doesn't take days to learn how to do this. It often takes months or years by the time you're really learning about how the organization works, getting that situational knowledge, all that. As we've seen, some skills are required to create any chart, whereas other skills are only required to create some charts. And yeah, like I said, it takes time to master these skills. Unfortunately, in a lot of organizations, chart making is sort of handed off to more junior people who don't have a lot of experience. They haven't acquired those skills yet in my list, and the results can be a little iffy. So that's kind of the end of talk 1. Now talk 2, I'm going to give you a little mini crash course on how to show data over time. And so this is basically a tiny little slice of my 2-day practical charts course. So we have some very simple data over time like this. What kind of chart should we use to show it? Any thoughts? Sorry? A bar chart? Yeah, that's one possibility. What's an even more common option? Exactly, right? Like, well, line chart, yeah, of course. And yeah, often this is going to be a good choice for showing data over time. Does that mean that we always show line charts for showing data over time? Well, let's see, right? Let's maybe test that idea. So here, a bit of a different situation. So here we're, let's say, a coffee shop, and our cookie sales in October, we're under 160K, 20% lower than September. And so we have a story here about individual time periods, right? Individual months. But in a line chart, I mean, this works, but in a line chart, I'm really my attention is drawn to the overall pattern of change. But if I want to focus in on individual time periods, maybe a bar chart might be actually a slightly better choice in this case. It's a subtle distinction, but in a bar chart, I really perceive these as 12 individual kind of discrete values. And so if the job of the chart is about individual time periods, then maybe this is a bit of a better choice than a standard line chart. So another scenario, so here we're looking at the number of medals that each country won during the Olympics. This must have been the Winter Olympics, because Canada actually won some medals. We only win medals in the winter, never really in the summer. And so again, pretty easy to understand line chart, even though there's a lot going on here. But let's say that the job of the chart, the insight that I wanted to communicate, was that the Netherlands started out strong, but then kind of lost ground to other countries. Sorry if there's people from the Netherlands here, but anyways, that's what happened. So the Netherlands, that's that kind of red line there. Does that look like something losing ground? No, right? It looks like something gaining ground. It's going up. I mean, if you kind of stare at it for long enough, you might be like, okay, I guess relative to other countries, yeah, but it's really not doing a good job of making that insight very obvious. And so instead, maybe we could try a chart like this. This is called a bumps chart. And instead of showing changes in quantity, it's showing changes in rank. And so then I can really see the Netherlands there, that red line. Yeah, it is actually kind of, they did lose ground, basically. It started in first place, ended off in 5th place. And so again, a situation where maybe a standard line chart isn't necessarily the best choice. It's not doing as good a job of kind of, doing the job of the chart, basically. And then we have here our daily expenses. But clearly something has gone horribly wrong, because we're looking at 31 days of time here, but it looks like we only have like 6 or 7 values. And so maybe the server crashed, we had some sort of horrible data loss or something like that. But yeah, we're actually missing values for most of the days. And yet, if we connect them in a standard line chart like this, it kind of looks like we actually kind of knew what happened. We knew what the pattern of change for expenses was in the month of May here. But do we have enough information to say what the pattern of change was? No, we're missing like 80% of the days. If we had all the data, it might have looked like this, or it might have looked like this, or it might have looked like this, right? And so this chart is basically kind of lying, right? It's saying here was a pattern of change of expenses during May, but we don't have enough information to actually know that. And so really the only safe option is what I call a dot plot. Well, lots of other people call dot plots too, it's not just me. And so, this makes it much more clear that essentially this is what we know and this is what we don't, right? Then there are gaps here, and we don't know what happened in the gaps. Now, the audience, whoever you're showing this chart to, might be like, well, I don't like this chart. But the problem isn't the chart, it's not even the chart type, it's the fact that 80% of the data is missing. And so, the solution isn't to basically make stuff up, right? Because that's kind of what we're doing here. It's to go and try and find the missing data, right? Or how about this situation? We've got a fictional television model here. This is the XLCD 65 TV. And again, we're using a standard line chart to show its price change over time. But I actually have two concerns with this chart type. The first is that it kind of looks like there was a price at the beginning of April, which is $400, and then kind of nothing until the beginning of May when it was $350. But that's actually not what happened, right? This TV actually had a price the whole time. It was $400 the whole time, but that's not really what this chart kind of looks like. And an even bigger concern that I have here is that, especially people who have maybe less chart reading experience, they might interpret this to mean that the price was $400 here, and then it steadily declined to $350 here. Like in the middle of April, it was like $375 or something, which was not the case, right? And so this is actually a data visualization mistake, right? It's a red X. To show this data accurately, I would have to show it as what's called a step chart. Again, it's kind of an unusual chart type, but if we want to avoid misleading the audience, we cannot use a standard line chart here. We have to use the step chart because it clearly or accurately shows what's going on. It was $400 the whole time, and then here it instantaneously changed price. So, kind of worth asking though, like, what's different about this particular situation? Why did we want to use a step chart here instead of a standard line chart? Well, there are basically two conditions here, two things that are true. The first is that these are values that occur at irregular intervals of time. And so with something like the price of a TV, especially if it's on Amazon or something, it can change prices like 5 times in one day and then stay the same for 3 weeks, right? So it's not a once-a-day value or a once-a-month value. It's kind of an anytime value. And these are also values that persist until the next value occurs. And so when the price drops to $350, that remains in effect. It persists until the next price change occurs. And so when you kind of recognize these irregular persistent time series, you start to notice them a lot in things like the balance of a bank account, the inventory level of a product, the current high bid of an auction item, like on eBay or something, the current long jump distance world record. These are all irregular persistent time series, and so you should be using step charts to show these. If you show them as standard line charts, you're going to be potentially misleading people. So here's a scenario where we need to show individual sales transactions, right? We're not showing daily totals or weekly averages. We're showing individual sales transactions. And again, we're using a standard line chart here. But, and it looks like sales are declining, right? It looks like the trend is down in this situation. But if we were to take these individual transactions and aggregate or group them together so that we're showing, say, weekly totals, it would actually look like this. So sales are not declining, sales are actually increasing, right? This is the same data. And so this, to me, is also a mistake, right? And using a line chart to show individual transactions in this case. Instead, I would use what I call a thin bar chart. It's also called a needle chart. I've heard a couple of different names for it. And so when we move to bars, then it really draws attention to the fact that these are kind of basically very irregular, discrete values, and I should not really perceive kind of a trend here. So when might it make sense to use these thin bar charts as opposed to a standard line chart? 3 conditions here. The first is when we need to show individual values, right? So we're not showing daily sales totals or monthly averages. We need to show the actual individual values. They occur at irregular intervals of time, like sales transactions, for example, and they are not persistent. And so with something like a sales transaction, that basically occurs at a single point in time, and then there's nothing after that until the next sales transaction occurs. And so these are not really persistent values. We also have situations like this maybe where we are comparing just 2 time periods. And so let's say we are like a charitable organization, we collect donations in 5 regions, and we just run a big advertising blitz, big advertising campaign, and we want to compare before the campaign with after the campaign. This is kind of a common way that you'll see it done. This is called a clustered bar chart. I'm not really a fan, though, because if you kind of squint so that you can't read any of the text and you can only see the graphics, it doesn't really look like things kind of changing over time. It just looks like 5 groups of two values. And even if I wanted to answer basic questions like which regions went up, which ones went down, I could get there, but I'm going to have to kind of work for it, basically. I could show the same data like this as a slope chart, which is a standard line chart, but just with two time periods, in this case, kind of a before and after time period. And so right away, even before I've read any of the text, I can tell that this is a story of things going up and things going down. Even if I hadn't highlighted the central region, you would have immediately noticed that there was 4 things going up and 1 thing going down. I never use this chart type, and I will tell you why in just a moment. There's another way where I could show this kind of data with these 2 time periods using what's called an arrow chart. And so it's kind of, I get a lot of the same insights than I can from a slope chart. I can see what went down, what went up the most. And so if I were to ask you, okay, well, based on this chart, which region improved their donation performance the most? What would you say? Which region? South, right? Yeah, of course. But when we think about it for a second, if we're talking about increases in donation performance, really, we should be looking at actually percentage change rather than absolute change, which would be like dollars in this case. And so maybe we'll add another arrow chart beside it that shows percentage change. Oops. Did the South improve the most? Nope. It was actually the North, right? So in relative terms, the North actually improved the most. And so, so few people understand the difference between relative and absolute change that I always actually show both. Because when you show both side by side, they get it, right? But if I only show the one on the left, then there would be very high potential to actually mislead the audience. They would come to incorrect conclusions about the data. And that is why I never use slope charts like this. Which region improved the most? Most people are going to say the South. As we just saw, though, that was wrong. It was actually the North. So where are we at? Right? Let's kind of maybe take a breather, recap here. Well, as we've seen, sometimes a standard line chart is the best way to show data over time, but there are a whole whack of situations where it's not. Where it's not just not the best choice, but where using a standard line chart would actually mislead the audience. It would cause them to misinterpret the underlying data. And so what do we do in practice? We have all these different ways of showing data over time. There's many different considerations that I just went through. Well, I think we can basically build these into a decision tree that can guide us to a good chart type choice at any time. So the first question might be, how many time periods do we have? Because if we only have 2 time periods, we're going to go straight to an arrow chart. But if we have more than 2 time periods, well, then our next question might be, do we have enough values to estimate the pattern of change? And if we don't, it means we're missing lots of numbers. Well, then we're going to go straight to a dot plot, because the other charts are going to be misleading if we use those. But if we have enough values to show the pattern of change, then our next question might be, do the values occur at regular intervals of time? And if they do, and it's more important to feature patterns of change, we use a standard line chart, because that actually does that pretty well. But if it's more important to feature individual time periods, like individual months or individual days, for example, then we're going to use a bar chart. And if it's more important to show changes in rank, well, then we're going to use a bumps chart. But then what happens if our values, they do not occur at regular intervals? So they are anytime numbers, right? They're not daily or monthly or weekly numbers. They're anytime numbers. Oh, don't take pictures yet. I'm not done. I'll tell you when. I'll be done very soon. So if our values are persistent, well, then we're going to use a step chart. And if they are not persistent, and we need to feature individual values, individual sales transactions, for example, well, then we're going to use a thin bar chart, also called a needle chart. You guys are still taking pictures. I'm not done. You'll be deleting all of these, trust me. When I get to the end, it'll be good, the better one. But if we need to feature summary values for regular intervals of time, like monthly totals, weekly averages, well, then we're going to go into this branch, and then we're going to use one of these 3 charts, because these work with values that occur at regular intervals of time. And so this is actually kind of a slightly simplified version of the true decision tree, which is what I teach in my course. I had to kind of cut it down a bit because I only have limited amount of time to show it. But just so you know, there are actually 9 or 10 ways of showing data over time. Now you can take a picture. This is kind of the full decision tree. However, it is just one of 8 decision trees that are in my course, because I think in order to create effective, Yeah, good luck. You'll never be able to read these. Buy my book, right? Anyways. Yeah, so because there are actually 50 chart types that I think we need to know about, even just for the basic stuff, right? I'm not talking about highly technical or specialized charts, just for your basic everyday reporting, presentations, 50 chart types. And so, yeah, these basically kind of will guide people to good chart type choices, without needing years of experience, basically. And so that's kind of the end part of the second part of my talk, maybe some key takeaways. What have we learned? Well, simple rules of thumb, like always use a standard line chart, show data over time, clearly don't work. Always use a pie chart, show breakdown of a total. There's actually 8 ways of showing a breakdown of a total. And so I wish it were so simple that we could use simple rules like this, but it's a little bit more complicated. Because most chart design choices are multifactorial and require a significant amount of skill to make these choices effectively. It's almost like learning a new language. And another thing that a lot of people don't really fully understand is that most of these design choices, not just choosing a chart type, but choosing a color palette, deciding how wide or narrow to make the scale, deciding what to highlight, are based primarily on the job of the chart. And most people, when they create a chart, what do? They sit down and say, what is the best way to visualize this data? But to me, that's the wrong starting point. The right starting point is like, why am I creating this chart? And oftentimes people, not only do they, if they even ask it, they often don't know. And it's basically impossible to design a chart if you don't know why you're designing the chart in the first place. What question you're trying to answer, if you're trying to persuade somebody to make a certain decision, who is that person, what decision are you trying to get them to make? So you basically got to really kind of know the job of the chart. So yeah, obviously there's lots more to talk about, so please feel free to connect with me. My website is always a good way. I am definitely the only person with this name on LinkedIn. By the way, congratulations, Vitaly, on the correct pronunciation. It's not an easy one. You just ignore half the letters and it all works out. Invented by silly French people a long time ago. And I'll leave it at that. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Nick. Would you join me for a little conversation?
Of course.
Oh my, we have questions. It's so interesting because every now and again, every now and again you find this sort of quick shortcut charts or cheat sheets, I should say, like on LinkedIn and everywhere else, where everything is basically, well, if it's a relationship, do this. If it's composition, do this, and so on, right? So, well, the decision tree that you showed, and this is again being one of many, that seems to be quite daunting. And I think, in a way that it actually really helps and guides people to kind of the right place. But I'm thinking, so if you happen to be, let's say, UX designer or UI designer, doesn't matter, and you just need to produce chart for a report or for a dashboard, right? Very often it feels like maybe we don't know how much data we will get. Maybe we don't know where, what the end result, the data will look like. How do you navigate that space? Because it's actually came very quickly from one of the attendees. That attendee is, hold on, just a second, right here. It's a concerned citizen with exclamation mark.
All right.
Okay. How do you choose the metrics that truly matter when stakeholders want to see everything on one screen? And how do you design it then? Yeah,
so I guess coming back to kind of an earlier part of the question, in terms of, like, if your chart is going to be generated dynamically, right, and so it's probably on a dashboard or something like that, yes, there are a whole set of additional constraints that come into play. There's a bunch of things that you can't do, like things like highlighting, adding annotations, and speech bubbles, which are very useful to do when you have charts for like a presentation or in a report. And so I mostly talk about that I have another course called Practical Dashboards, where I talk about, sort of displays of data that are dynamically generated. And yeah, like it is more limiting. Like there are things that you can and should do in a kind of a static medium where you have full control, data is not changing, that you just, you can't do on a dashboard. And then kind of the second part of the question about, what do I do when my stakeholders ask for like everything in the kitchen sink on their dashboard, right? It sounds like he's basically asking a dashboard question. And this is a question that I have spent the last 10 years figuring out how to answer, because oftentimes people complain. I don't know how many people work on dashboards here, but the people who design dashboards complain that their users are so unreasonable because they always ask for like tons of information on a display. And there's kind of a prevailing view amongst a lot of dashboard designers that really, if you kind of, I don't know, work hard enough or think hard enough about it, you'll be able to somehow distill it down to like the 3 or 4 or 5 kind of truly important numbers. I don't believe that. I don't think that's realistic, because the reality is that in virtually every organization now, well, the number one reason why people ask for dashboards is basically just to answer one question, which is everything okay, right? And that's the hardest question to answer, because when you start looking at what does everything mean, it's like every product line, every region, and so, but that's kind of reality, is that if there's any number in any of those metrics or segments of metrics that requires attention, somebody needs to see it and find out about it. And so it's hard to explain without showing examples, but it took me a long time, but I figured out a way to basically have not a dashboard, but a system of dashboards that will enable people to very quickly zero in on areas of the organization that require attention, even when there are tens, hundreds of thousands of metrics. Like I said, once we start segmenting by business unit and project and region, that's very typical, right? You have tens, hundreds of thousands of numbers. Yeah. It's just you need basically a big bag of tricks. That took me a while to figure out. You need some statistics so you can automatically look for time series patterns that suggest that metrics are behaving abnormally because people can't look at them all manually and things like that.
Yeah, because also I think that very often when we think about dashboards, we think about big pie charts and all these big widgets that are all scattered around, all customizable and all. But in some situations, it might be that, at least what I've been seeing, it's something just as a list with a lot of mini charts next to it could be even better, especially when you actually need to display a lot of stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to talk about dashboard design best practices because I mean, this term dashboard means different things to different people, right? In fact, if you kind of just polled this room or just picked 1,000 random people somewhere and said, what is a dashboard? Most of them would actually tell you, well, pretty much any display with a bunch of charts on it. They'll just call that a dashboard. And that's fine, actually. I don't have a problem with that. But as designers, that's problematic because there are so many different kinds of displays with a bunch of charts on them that serve for different audiences, that serve different purposes. And so in my course, I basically start with sort of a 20 or 30-minute segment about where we kind of pull the word apart into 9 different types of dashboards. And then you can start talking about best practices. Like, for example, is it better to have like just a few metrics on a dashboard, or should you have lists of numbers, right? Yep. Well, for dashboard type number 3, just a couple of big charts is good. I call those lay of the land dashboards, where it's just kind of a sort of a curated selection of metrics, but it's not good for answering is everything okay, because you're only showing a tiny number of numbers. But then you have what I call tactical monitoring dashboards, where you're looking for problems anywhere in the organization. And those look totally different best practices. Hopefully we're okay, all right. Yeah, that was the dramatic timing of the lighting that I planned beforehand. Nice job, guys, all right.
Excellent. I think also there are many questions that came up around accessibility. Because very often when we think about the way of how the bar charts are designed, you have red and green, which is a color blindness or color weakness issue. Yeah. How would you actually in general deal with it? And maybe there are also other accessibility considerations to keep in mind.
Yeah, I mean, and this is something that, I should talk more about in my workshops, but people tend to think, when they think of accessibility is primarily around color blindness, and it is something that you need to consider, right? In this room, probably something like 4% of people are colorblind. In certain demographics, like Caucasian males, it's actually as high as 8%. And so, I mean, in my course, I basically offer a couple of tips, things like using color blindness simulators. There's lots of them online. You can take your chart or your dashboard, upload it, and it shows it back to you, what it looks like to people with different forms of color blindness, which is generally a good idea. But the best option, although it's more work, is, especially if you have a dashboard or a spreadsheet or anything, or a website, anything that's interactive, is you basically have kind of 2 versions of all your graphs. And so by default, it shows probably the more intuitive version, which is like red, green, or more aesthetically pleasing colors, but that are not colorblind safe. And then there's a prominent control or a toggle or a checkbox or something at the top. And so it says, oh, if you're colorblind, check this off. And then the palette changes. That's ideal, but it's also more work. But like you said, it's not just about color blindness. There's also people who have like color contrast, sensitivity issues, where if you have, for example, dark gray text on a light gray background, they can't read it. And so, yeah, I mean, I touch on it in my workshops. I should probably talk about it more. I did actually write an article last year about adapting charts to black and white. And the reason why I wrote it originally was because sometimes charts appear in books, and books are more expensive to print in color, and so sometimes you have to adapt the chart for black and white. In certain industries, like, I don't know about in Europe, but in North America, they still use frickin' fax machines, and so your chart might actually get faxed or like copied on the, the crappy office photocopier. And it's actually not simple. Like, there's like, I talk about 10 different kind of ways of trying to make your charts sort of readable in black and white. But then people came back to me actually and said, actually, this is also very useful for accessibility. And so I'll probably do, a little bit more on that, hopefully kind of later this year. I'll add a little extra bit to the workshop to talk about that.
So maybe just 2 more questions to wrap up. Natalie is wondering, oh, wow, that's a nice one. That's a nice one. Everywhere I read about pie charts, they are dismissed as being a very poor choice for data visualization.
I was waiting for
Is it really, italicized, is it really a bad idea to use pie charts? We use them all the time, and it seems to be working just fine. But every time I mention it in conversations, it feels like we're doing it always wrong. Are pie charts really the Comic Sans of data visualization?
That's a good way of putting it. No, well, I mean, I used to be an anti-pie charter. I'll be honest about it.
It's a thing?
Very much a thing, yeah. Like, if you start kind of, going deep in the data visualization community, you'll encounter this right away. The community is still pretty split, although that split has been changing quite a bit. When I first started teaching data visualization like 10 years ago, there were a lot more kind of like never pie charters than pro pie charters.
Even never pie charters.
Oh, yeah. Like,
oh, wow, this is like a whole family.
It's a whole whole movement, but this debate has actually been happening for literally 100 years. I came across an article from 1910 that was talking about this, and so anyway, so I used to be like never pie charters or never pie charts, but then I just thought long and hard about it, and I saw like comments like this, people saying, look, this is working for me, it's working for my audience, like I really don't see the issue, and so a couple of years ago I changed camps. I was like, I think the weaknesses of pie charts have been exaggerated, the strengths have been kind of maybe underplayed, and I actually wrote quite a long article about this. I finally decided, okay, I'm gonna go public with this. I'm gonna just, absorb the flames, and I put it in the Journal of the Data Visualization Society. It's called Nightingale. It's a great journal, by the way, and it became their most read article of the year. Like, it was.
And the most debated article?
Yeah, although I would say that, I mean, obviously there's a selection bias in terms of people who are going to even read an article like that, but over 90% were actually like, I think, either I was always okay with pie charts, or now I'm okay with pie charts. So but just Google my name, pie charts, you'll find it.
So as a quick summary for Natalie, it's okay.
It's fine. It's fine. The trick, though, is knowing when to use pie charts. And as I have a decision tree like the one that we saw earlier for, ways to show the breakdown of a total. And, pie chart is just one of 6 options, right? You have stack bar charts, regular bar charts, waterfall charts. And the trick is knowing when to use each. And as I hope I showed, like, it's certainly something you can learn in a relatively short period of time, but most people haven't learned it. And so what you often find are pie charts being used inappropriately, where maybe a stacked bar chart or even a regular bar chart might have been a better choice. But then people who hate pie charts look at that and see, pie charts are terrible. But it's like, no, it just, this wasn't the right use case for a pie chart. But that doesn't mean we should never use them. The trick is to learn when to use them, basically. All right.
Well, we're a little bit behind schedule, but thank you so much, Nick, for being with us. If you have questions for Nick on data viz or anything else on charts, please come a little bit earlier after the lunch break to the membership stand in the 2nd floor. You can ask all questions directly, and also the same, of course, goes to Christine as well. But thank you so much for being with us, Nick.
Thanks. Thanks, Vitaly. Thanks, everybody.